You are sitting in a quiet, bustling midday cafe, enjoying the aroma of roasted coffee beans, listening to the hum of passing conversations and the clinking of cups. At the table across from you sits a man in a crisp shirt, quietly sipping his black coffee, lightly scrolling through his phone. To you, and to the rest of the world, he is just an ordinary employee taking a short break from a routine workday. But inside his skull, behind those perfectly calm features, a terrifying, silent countdown has just begun. At this exact moment, it appears as though activity in some neural circuits is diminishing, while others associated with reward and anticipation become increasingly active. The world around him has lost its natural colors and sounds, shrinking into a dark tunnel with only one thing at its end: the victim who just walked past the window. You are not looking at a human being living in the present moment. You are looking at a complex biological and psychological machine that has entered a hunting state from which there may be no return. To truly understand what happens inside this person's mind, in the hours, or perhaps weeks, preceding his crime, you must abandon your traditional idea of sudden rage or reckless impulse. Serial murder, in the vast majority of studied cases, is not born from a sudden fit of anger or a momentary loss of temper. It is a cold, meticulously calculated ritual forged in the dark over long periods. In one influential model of serial homicide proposed by Joel Norris, this stage is known as the aura phase. Here, the killer begins to gradually detach from his surrounding reality. Daily life, bills, work, and social relationships lose all meaning, fading into annoying background noise. His mind slowly retreats into a world of dark fantasies that he has been invading and weaving for years. This isolated fantasy is not just a passing thought. It is an urgent need that presses on his nervous system much like severe hunger presses on an empty stomach. In these seconds, as he stares out the cafe window, a complex neurochemical shift begins to unfold inside his brain. Functional MRI scans suggest that many of these killers, specifically those with psychopathic traits, show unusual activity in the prefrontal cortex. This part of the brain is responsible for logic, empathy, and evaluating the moral consequences of actions. In normal brains, these are the brakes that stop us from harming others and make us feel a visceral ache if we see someone in pain. But in the minds of some serial killers, research shows these brakes may be biologically defective or function too weakly to halt the impulse. In contrast, other parts of the brain associated with reward light up. For him, thinking about and planning the next crime triggers a reward response remarkably comparable to that seen in severe chemical addiction. The crime here transcends being a mere violent act. It is a deep biological and psychological dependency, and the fantasies that once satisfied him are no longer enough. The fantasy now ferociously demands to be turned into flesh and blood. As this fantasy solidifies into an inevitable decision, the killer enters what is often called the predatory phase. Here, his visual and auditory perception shifts entirely, and his senses zero in on a single target. He does not see the victim as a human being with a family, dreams, a history, and fears. He sees them as a symbol, an abstract target, or simply a vessel to discharge the massive psychological tension built up inside him. This process is known as dehumanization, a subconscious, or sometimes entirely conscious, defensive trick played by the dark mind to ensure there is no emotional barrier or trace of pity that might ruin the moment. As he watches his victim from afar, something happens that completely contradicts all known laws of human nature. If you were planning to commit a terrifying or dangerous act that threatened your life, your heart would pound wildly, your hands would sweat, and your adrenaline and cortisol levels would spike in preparation for a fight-or-flight response. But the shocking scientific surprise observed by researchers is that some studies have found that certain individuals with pronounced psychopathic traits may experience a noticeable drop in their heart rate in the moments leading up to an attack. The closer they get to the execution, the calmer they appear to become. Their breathing slows and their muscles relax. They find in this impending violence the only peace they lack in the chaos of their normal lives. This terrifying physiological calm grants them a lethal advantage in society. The Mask of Sanity. In this stage, known as the luring phase, the organized killer can smile with apparent sincerity, be charming, and offer help to the victim with the utmost politeness. He can appear as the safest person on a dark street. Behind this warm, comforting smile is an absolute glacial void calculating distances, angles, and probabilities. He mimics human emotions with astonishing precision because he has studied them his entire life without ever actually feeling them. He knows what pity looks like, what romantic interest looks like, and he uses these expressions as hacking tools to bypass the victim's defenses. Every word he speaks, every movement he makes, every tone of voice he uses is part of a tight script rehearsed thousands of times inside the dark theater of his mind. Here we must pause for a moment to ask, was this mind born this way? Modern science tells us the picture is not that deterministically simple. Epigenetics and neuroscience indicate that certain genes, such as the MAOA gene, sometimes called the warrior gene, can create a biological predisposition for aggression and impair impulse control. But biology alone is rarely an inescapable destiny. In many cases, it requires an environmental trigger to awaken this genetic anomaly. Deep childhood trauma, continuous psychological and physical abuse, or growing up in an environment that strips a child of their sense of safety, act as switches that turn these genes on and others off, permanently distorting the emotional development of the brain. Genetics might load the gun, but the environment, cruel experiences, and a warped psychological makeup are what ultimately pull the trigger. As the decisive moment to strike approaches, the psychological pressure reaches its zenith. The external world vanishes entirely, and with it, all laws, societies, and potential consequences fade away. There is only him, the victim, and an absolute sense of power. The primary drive fueling this human machine in most organized serial crimes is not sex, nor money, nor even direct revenge against a specific person. It is control. Many of these individuals grew up in environments where their will was stripped away, where they were humiliated or psychologically shattered. For some offenders, the crime becomes the one moment in which they experience an overwhelming sense of absolute control. In the microsecond before the strike, research suggests that activity across several neurotransmitter systems may intensify. The ability to dictate the fate of another human being may produce an overwhelming sense of euphoria and control. And when the point of no return is crossed and the actual execution takes place, a massive shock occurs inside this mind. For a few moments or hours, the killer lives his fantasy as a tangible reality. But with terrifying speed, this transparent illusion shatters. Once the act is over, the heightened reward response rapidly subsides, leaving behind a profound emotional void. Reality abruptly and violently crashes the scene. The victim, who during the aura phase was a symbol of perfect control and euphoria, may now become a stark and unsettling reality, far removed from the fantasy that preceded it. The experience was not as flawless as his deceptive imagination had painted it for months. There was resistance or unexpected blood, or a scream that disrupted the perfect script. This violent chemical and psychological freefall throws him into a dark descent known in Norris's model as the depression phase. He feels hollow, cold, and senses that something was fundamentally incomplete. To combat this terrifying emptiness, many resort to what is often referred to later in Norris's model as the trophy phase. The killer keeps an item belonging to the victim, a piece of jewelry, a lock of hair, or even photographs. This souvenir is not just a trophy for bragging rights, it is a psychological tool the dark mind uses to try and recapture that fleeting euphoria, to reactivate the brain's reward circuits every time he looks at it. But the trophy, no matter what it is, inevitably loses its chemical luster over time. It is exactly this emptiness, this profound sense of emotional deficit, that makes him a serial killer rather than a murderer who committed a single crime. His deep realization that reality did not match the perfect fantasy plants the very first seed for the next cycle. The dark mind immediately begins to rewrite the fantasy, tweak the details, correct the mistakes that happened, and figure out how to perfect the ritual next time to achieve that ultimate euphoria, which, in truth, can never be attained. The man goes back to wearing his meticulous human mask, cleans his clothes carefully, returns to his favorite cafe the next day, orders his black coffee, and smiles at the waitress with extreme kindness, while the wheel of dark imagination starts spinning all over again in the deepest, darkest corners of his brain, waiting for the next target. Understanding exactly what goes on inside the mind of a serial killer with scientific and psychological precision never means sympathizing with him. It means uncovering the complex machinery of human evil and how it is forged. We live in a naive world where we think monsters have claws and fangs and that we can spot them just by looking into the dark. But the most terrifying truth proven by criminal psychology and neuroscience is that the most lethal monsters are the ones who look exactly like us. They share our cramped elevators, stand in front of us in crowded checkout lines, and might even smile at us on the street in broad daylight, while their minds may be processing the world in profoundly different ways. If you find yourself drawn to uncovering these hidden truths about the human mind, and if you are ready to challenge your view of the familiar world and look beyond comfortable human nature, then your journey here is not over. Liking this video tells us you are ready to dive deeper into the complexities of human existence. Subscribe now to the Mentra channel and turn on the notification bell to be the first to join us in our upcoming cinematic thought experiments. Share your thoughts in the comments. Based on what you heard today, do you think the human brain can be cured if these anomalies are caught early? Or is the point of no return written the moment the very first dark fantasy forms? At Mentra, we don't just offer ready-made answers. We seek out the questions the world is too afraid to ask.